So I'm here today with Dr. James Stanger, PhD. Um, could you please tell me a little bit about yourself? Where did you go to school, and what did you study, and how did you end up in software?
You bet, you bet. I decided to go all the way at my studies at Brigham Young University and get my PhD in unemployment, and I got it in English, believe it or not. I went to the University of California at Riverside finally, studied under a guy named Bob Essick and studied 19th century British Romanticism, wrote a dissertation on William Blake and his understanding of the body. And that was back in '97, and it was right around '93 or '94 when I realized I did some work for the English department, working on their firewall, doing some things like that. I was on a dissertation fellowship at the time, and which are great. They give you money, you don't have to do anything, right? But what I did one time is I did some side work, and I got paid about as much as the side work for about a month worth of work as I did for the entire year of the dissertation fellowship. And that's when I kind of said, you know, maybe I need to retread myself a little bit, and I got into the computer side of things, which I'd always been interested in anyhow. So I spent the last 10 years now working for the Certified Internet Web Professional program, and many other certifications as well. There's another one about convergence, the Convergence Technologies Professional Certification that my company owns. But I've also done a lot of work with the Linux Professional Institute as well. So I've, for years, have worked a lot with the certification industry and the training industry. It's been a real love of mine to give people jobs. Years ago, even when I was getting that degree in unemployment, I had a lot of friends who were looking for work, and I got myself some part-time jobs, these wonderful adjunct professor jobs. They call them adjunct professor jobs. Adjunct meaning like something, a useless add-on, you know, that's right. But anyway, I got them jobs. I was able to get one myself, and I started recommending friends. And I've kind of done that my whole life in a sense. And I see my position in certification and what I do as a way to bring on people who are in my community, for CIW, for LPI, for anything, to get my friends jobs. That's the way I see it.
Okay. So you mentioned CIW community. You actually have a blog at ciwcommunity.org.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and what kind of information is there? And what
You bet. We had a lot of people. We work a lot with the CIW community with self-study people. Other major niche, though, that we're in is university instructors, and of course, there's students. We also work with high schools, but our major niche is right in the universities where they want our curriculum. They want our curriculum, and there's a university out there, for example, called Western Governors University. They're based out of Salt Lake. They use our certifications as a major basis for their degree programs in web design, web development, and in other areas. In fact, our CIW Foundation's product, they basically say, look, if you're going to go into our majors, anywhere in the IT profession, we want you to start there because it's a nice baseline of knowledge.
Okay.
So the reason why I'm so interested in working in certification and working in this area is because it's a way that most of our customers have a way of figuring out some sense of community or where knowledge begins, true knowledge begins. We see ourselves as creating what used to be called knowledge workers back in the 50s. And a knowledge worker is somebody who either creates knowledge or pushes it in an interesting sort of way, which to me perfectly defines people in the IT profession. And so we work a lot with universities, we work a lot with high schools as well.
Excellent. So you've written several books on certification, including Server Administration Study Guide, CIW Security Professional Study, and your latest book, LPI Linux Certification in a Nutshell.
That's right.
Which incidentally received 4.5 stars on Amazon out of, I think, some 50 reviews.
Yeah, that's not bad. Linux Journal gave us, back when it came out, just a few months after it came out, the Book of the Year award for them. So it's turned out very well.
Good.
And of course, it's all due to me. No, Andy Oram, the editor who is behind this. You have some fantastic authors who came in well before me, but it was great to be a part of a little community of people, and to help bring on additional authors too. I did that, so that was good.
Well, your books and a lot of your educational efforts are focused on certification. So what is the value of certification, and how's LPI certification different than some of the others which maybe don't have as much value?
You know, it's funny, certification, I remember back in the day, back 1998, set the Wayback Machine. And it was a cheap way to make money for a lot of people, okay? And it was also a cheap way to get your brand out there and make sure that your Windows server or your Novell server or whatever was properly supported. I see certification in a lot of a different sort of way. All of us remember, or at least a lot of us remember, back in the day when you wanted to learn Unix, or when you wanted to learn that VAX server. I'm setting the Wayback Machine, but when you really wanted to learn enterprise level knowledge, what did you do? You sat in front, or you sat at the feet of the bastard operator from hell, or from that person who really knew her or his stuff, usually his. Well, how do you do that now? Who is your mentor now? Certification takes the place of the mentor. And I also see certification as a way to join a community. Back in the, we still have lugs hanging around here, Linux user groups. We still have lots of user groups doing their things, but in this virtual economy and in this virtual world, you need a community of people to get together and share ideas. Okay. And we've seen this obviously in the open source community, all the different projects that are surrounding us here at OSCON. But the CIW community is a way for instructors, for whether they be educators in community colleges, universities, or self-study people, or absolute experts who have nothing to do with education, who we found in our surveys that actually the majority of people who are interested in CIW actually aren't the instructors or even just newbies. They're people who have been in the profession a good 5-10 years, usually 10 years.
Excellent.
So we see it as a way to make sure that we separate the wheat from the chaff, that true professionals can talk to each other and communicate with each other.
Excellent, excellent. Let's get a little bit more practical. And we've been kind of at the abstract level. So what are some of the typical challenges that you're faced with when you migrate from, say, Windows to Linux? Or, for that matter, are there families of problems? These kinds of problems, say, tend to be typical for database servers versus these for app servers and these for web servers, that sort of thing.
Good question. That's a great question. David Allen and I, David Allen was the lead author for a book. That was the Windows to Linux migration handbook or toolkit. He did a fantastic job on that, and he had the bad judgment to bring me on a couple of chapters, a few chapters, and it's been fantastic working with him. And the things that we discovered were that, and I like the way you formed the question, because you talked about, for example, the challenges of a database server or an LDAP server as opposed to desktop migration. I mean, these are all radically different things, and I'd say, from the soft sense of it, by soft I mean the soft skills sense of it, you better get buy-in of the managers, and you better get a way to get those end users understanding things well, because they're
across the board.
Across the board. I mean, that's the first thing, and it's usually the first thing that's forgotten about. Right away we get into LDAP.conf, or right away we get into, well, let's get to the MySQL tables and let's get them normalized and get those databases properly done, right? But to take a step back just for a second, I think it's making sure that you get the buy-in of your management to the solution that you're going to do. And if you don't have those end users properly primed, they're going to cause nothing but problems for you. And you'll have a perfect solution on the back end, and it won't work. When it comes to database migration, we have, at CIW, we have a relatively new product that we have. It's basically the CIW database design course or certification. If you don't want to take the certification, great, read the course.
Right.
Because we found when it comes to migration, you can go ahead and most anybody can migrate a simple database over from one platform to another. But what if it's poorly designed? What if it's not normalized? What if you've got some serious problems in your MySQL? Oh, that Linux server you migrated us to is incredibly slow. Well, you could have the biggest iron on the planet not able to run that database because it wasn't properly designed. So I would say you have to start with those fundamentals that, frankly, none of us wants to start with. But that's what you do.
And you could reach into the community you were talking about, get common experiences with people who've done this sort of thing.
Absolutely. When it comes to, for example, in organizing that effort, creating that database, design cert, they didn't come running to Stanger and say, hey, create that for us, because I know a lot about databases, but not enough to do something quality. So we reached out to our community, people at Western Governors. We had people down in Phoenix, Arizona, who are really good consultants, and we had people from England. They may have had they may have had bad dental work, but they know their databases really well. No. Yeah, you're going to have to edit that one. No,
Okay.
but no, seriously, these are good friends of mine, good people I know, and we bring all these people worldwide from the outside, and the group is always stronger than the individual that way. As long as they're properly led, and as long as there's some organization, the group is always stronger. As long as it doesn't devolve into some sort of herd mentality,
Okay.
you're all right.
Well, speaking of getting information out there, you have your own podcast, and you've had it since 2000, which is longer than most of us have been thinking about podcasts. So tell me about it. What sort of information can I find there? How often is it updated?
You bet. You bet. We let's see. The last update I did was just a couple of months ago, doing a podcast about some of my experiences over at BrainShare. That I had some good times over there. But one of the podcasts was a DNS one, which for web designers, they don't care about DNS, for heaven's sake. Can you think of anything less related? But when it comes to understanding web design and web development, if you don't understand the servers and the architecture that you're working on, you're not going to be a very successful employee. And so I created a podcast about that.
Okay.
Another one that we've been doing is we get a lot of people still asking about, well, tell me what this open source is,
Right. Right.
Tell me, which I find stunning. How could you even ask that question? I try not to reply with that answer, but with that. But really, it's something that a vast majority of educators and a lot of the self-study people that we do, they don't know. And so that's one that's coming up.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you're actually speaking at OSCON, and you're talking about open source and the educational community. And you talk about how educational institutions that use open source technologies don't really teach them as a primary business tool. So
Yeah.
they sort of eat their own dog food, but they don't really tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
So please talk about what the problem is there specifically and how you think it can be addressed.
There are a couple of different issues, and it has to do with some of the sectors. In the high school, you'll find that the level, and we do a lot of business with high school. They do a lot of exams with us and things like that. They don't know open source hardly at all. They really don't quite understand it. At the community college level, they will bring it in, but usually it's, okay, this concludes the lecture. Did you want to go over some of that Linux stuff? Let's do that after the lecture, over a beer or something like that. Right? Not that I drink, but that's what happens.
Okay.
And so it's done as an adjunct. There's that word again. It's done as a separate thing. Why isn't it done primarily? And what we found is that a lot of the advisory councils that these people listen to, CIW has an advisory council, but a lot of these community colleges and universities, they have their advisory councils that they put together. Well, the larger the university, the bigger the clients are going to come in. It's going to be Adobe for design. It's going to be Microsoft or Novell or whatever. They're going to be going vendor specific. And I know Novell is open source, and they've done some terrific open source support. But in general, most of these people think that in industry, it's going to be some sort of big vendor in there rather than things with names like Drupal. You're not going to be going with Joomla or Drupal. Those are kind of funny names. Not to me. I use Drupal for my community.
Right.
But most people are going to go for SharePoint Server.
Okay. That actually makes some sense. Actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a tough one though, because
Sure.
And there are ways that the open source community can solve this problem, and part of it is you start looking outward rather than inward.
Okay.
We look inward a lot.
Well, let's develop that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So you talk about open source friends that are actually holding back universities or us from success. Talk about that a little bit, and also tell me about how some universities and colleges that are at the forefront of open source advocacy, and what can we learn from them, and how are they benefiting at a practical level besides the warm fuzzies?
You bet. No, great question. I find that the more that we focus on, and again, I am not for software patents in any way, shape, or form, and I understand the GPL quite well and all the various the variations and things that are similar to it, and I'm a great supporter of the whole copyleft thing. The more we focus and intensify ourselves on that, the more that we obsess about the minutiae, the less we are realizing, the less we are explaining to people, good young students who want to come in and learn how to develop. The open source development environment, the ability to develop in the open source way is an incredibly compelling development model. You've got, Novell had shifted over, Red Hat developed its empire on it, Google. Microsoft is embracing it and extending it in one way or the other,
Sure.
right? And probably truly embracing it in a lot of ways. It's pretty interesting to see how that's all going. The more that we focus on things like, well, that doesn't exactly perfectly follow the GPL, and the more you have people evangelizing in a very kind of strident sort of way and in an impractical sort of way what open source is, you're not going to get anywhere.
I see.
From academia, in academic point of view, these folks are very practical. They have to teach their students. They want probably to go home at somewhere along in the evening, you know, before midnight, right, and have a bit of a life. They don't care too much about that minutia, right? And the more that we focus on that, and which our community does, and the more our community, the community fractionalizes and balkanizes itself with all these little projects that are really cool,
right?
But they're not as useful as they could be. It's funny. Years ago, was it Monty Python Life of Brian? It's an old movie,
right.
And there's this one guy always talking about those splitters. I hate those splitters. And then he realized that he was one himself. All of us in the community. It's so funny at the, you know, and we see this all the time in the open source community. We're all a bunch of independents, you know.
Sure.
There are times when it comes to work together, when it comes time to say, here's the practical open source model, and here's how you can make money doing it. Here's how you can really create incredible projects doing it. The more that we do that, the more we focus on it, I think that's when the friends who focus on the wrong thing will get in line and go, you know, you're right. Let's work and play well with others and get something done.
Well, to continue along that theme of practicality, how are some of the universities that are embracing open source, how are they practically benefiting?
Oregon State does a really interesting job of that. You know, I mean, they've, besides, you know, housing the kernel, I mean, look at that, you can actually do that. Right. But Oregon State, you know, with their work with Mozilla has been very impressive, things like that. I think you also see there are universities that I work with, for example, the University of West of Scotland. You know, you're not going to see them on any huge SourceForge announcement or anything like that. But the fact that they use open source in a very practical way. They used to be called the University of Paisley. Very interesting perspective there. Western Governors University, even though they don't have a particular you know, open source degree or anything like that. The reason why they embraced CIW is because CIW will pick the best of breed tools to teach the job skills that everybody recognizes are important for web design, web development, server administration. Okay. And we, you know, and by embracing CIW, they're embracing open source because we have it all over the place. And that's a major contribution or a major part of CIW that I'm very proud of.
Excellent, excellent. So let's shift tracks just a little bit.
Sure.
You recently referred to Salt Lake City as crossroads of the web.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I was being a little bit, remember, I think the old term is Salt Lake City was the crossroads of the West, right? I think, was it St. Louis is the gateway to the West? And then Salt Lake was the crossroads, who knows? I live in Olympia, Washington. I'm sure that's the wet place of the West. But anyway, the reason why I referred to it as that is I think that maybe Novell ought to consider becoming the crossroads of the web in the same sense that Microsoft, right, has, you know, over the last few months we've all seen this, how they've been trying to grab Yahoo because they see a major need to change that OS-based, you know, 1995-based culture, you know, or even 1980-based culture of the platform OS into, you know, software as service. As you know, basically Google, okay? Right. And so they're grabbing Yahoo that way. My point was that maybe Novell, instead of saying we are the Swiss Army toolkit, Swiss Army knife of the data center, which in a lot of ways they do that. They're kind of interesting that way. Maybe they ought to consider, you know, instead of worrying about the desktop or worrying about where they are in the data center, maybe they ought to worry about how the web platform can revolutionize them, and not so much making Linux as the play, as the OS, but making the web as the play. And Linux will be along in there, and open source will be all over in there, because that's what the web's all about. It's very much open source. I mean, for heaven's sake. You know, from Apache to MySQL, all the LAMP platforms to PHP, I mean, you know, the list, I could blather on even more than I already am. But my point is that if Novell wants to do something interesting, they ought to go you know, into the web. And who knows, maybe Microsoft will grab them and Yahoo and everybody will be webby and happy. Who knows? You know?
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned a term earlier that I'd like to get back to. You said convergence.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's a good question. You know, back, you know, around 2000 or 2005, convergence was basically, was basically the idea that what were normally voice networks, you know, when we talked on our cell phones or we talked on our home phones, they were on networks that were built in the 60s or the 40s or you know, standard Ma Bell kind of stuff.
Okay.
Starting around, you know, in the 90s and all that, we started talking about how voice can be put over the same data networks as email and the web and all that. That's very much the year 2000, year 2002 kind of thing. Today, convergence means the web. Today, convergence means that you are doing all of that. You're doing voice and data together in a seamless network, but you're also bringing in video, and the web is going to be the platform. Examples of this would be, you know, why would Skype be bought by eBay, for example? I think a lot of people scratch their heads at that. I mean, it makes no sense. But that's a perfect example of convergence, and it does make sense because you have people who want to contact each other, make deals, sell, and all that. Why do that? Why pay a toll? Right? And so here you are combining one of the more effective auction-based sites, and you see this on Craigslist, which is my favorite.
Right.
Craigslist with Skype addresses going on all over the place. That to me is today's idea of convergence. Okay. So you're going to have Flash developers, PHP developers, Ruby people needing to know H.323, SIP, all of the ways that voice, video, and data work together. Okay. And that's what our CTP program's all about too. It's exciting to work with. I work with people like Avaya and many others, Mitel,
okay.
On a regular basis, putting together those kinds of solutions too.
So convergence in that sense is a little bit of a complement to emergence, which is sort of where the best technologies sort of come to the fore, almost like an organic evolution or a synthetic evolution.
Yeah. You see it as an organic evolution.
I see it organic in that it's natural, but synthetic in that it is synthetic.
Yeah, I think so, and it's interesting because people will talk about emerging technologies or they'll talk about disruptive technologies, that kind of lingo. And it's definitely disruptive what is going on. You know, you have what the web is doing in terms of Craigslist, auctions, whatever, and also in terms of how convergence is working and video. I think that what you're going to see is in the future how the web really truly becomes corporate. I mean, you could say, well, James, it's been corporate for years, but I mean really truly functional. And it'll be interesting to see how the developers that I talk with here at OSCON, and I love talking to them, will fit into that, and how, or not, you know, and that's okay, because that's where your innovation comes in.
So you think it's okay that the web is becoming more corporate?
Oh boy, I don't know. It depends on what that C word means, you know, what corporate means, you know. I mean, we could all talk about, oh, it suddenly slips my mind. We could talk all day about, you know, network neutrality and all that sort of thing. If that's what you mean by corporate, absolutely not.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, for heaven's sake. But I think it comes into, I would rather use the other C word, which is community, right? And how, you know, various corporations and various creative people can get together to create an interesting solution. Okay. That to me is where it's at. I don't know, you know, do I want Comcast to you know, keep blocking BitTorrent and all that? Of course not. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Okay. Okay. I just have one last question for you.
Sure.
To finish up. So on your blog, you've talked a little bit about Dan Aykroyd's favorite band and the technologically hip.
Yeah, the tragically hip. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
No, I like that, technologically hip. Maybe that'll be a band I'll put together. I like that one. Yeah.
Well, what does that actually mean? What does that mean to you?
Oh, you know, what's fun about that is Dan Aykroyd's interesting because he's a person who you know, has obviously made it very big in the United States. He's a Canadian citizen, or at least he used to be. I don't know what he is now. But Tragically Hip are always big up in Canada. And I was like, first of all, I remember the name. It's kind of, that's a cool little name for a band. I like that. But what I also like about it is that here's Dan Aykroyd, you know, in the U.S. corporate world, you know, doing all that. Yet he has a nice little idiosyncratic, you know, band that he enjoys listening to that reminds him of home. You know, so it's all about local with me. As much as the globe of I've trotted, you know, whether it be the UK or Beijing last year, or you know, now here in Portland, I like the idea of where people can, you know, create local solutions that really work. And that's what's so interesting about the web is you do things on a very project-oriented basis, and yet it has global appeal. So there's something about, you know, that Dan Aykroyd reaches back to his roots that just I kind of liked.
So we've been talking with Dr. James Stanger. Dr. Stanger, thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.